I don't want to bore you with how old I am, but when I first started operating video cameras, I didn't have to worry about exposure at all. There was always a clever engineer at the end of a long cable who would do all of that stuff for me. Even in later years, when I did have to think about exposure, the only in-camera tool we had was zebras, or zebras for our US friends. And I got pretty comfortable just using zebras. But then, for most of that time, we only had black and white viewfinders. You'd think, now that we have amazing cinema cameras shooting log or even RAW, with loads of dynamic range, that getting a usable exposure would be easy. But no. It's counterintuitive, but I think nailing the correct exposure is actually harder now than it's ever been, even with all the tools we've got apart from zebras, like histograms, waveforms, LUTs, and false colour. I really hate false colour. However, something I've been trying recently is the EL Zone system from cinematographer Ed Lachman, and I think I'm a convert. If you shoot or light for log, you might be surprised at just how useful EL Zone can be. Ta-da! When measuring exposure levels, the problem with tools like waveforms, zebras and false colour is that they're all based on IRE. That's the linear percentage of a composite video signal as measured by the Institute of Radio Engineers? The clue's in the name. And there are two main problems with using IRE as an exposure measurement. Firstly, IRE means very little with every camera manufacturer now using log curves with different gamma values. Even with a single reference point like 18% grey, you still need to know the specs for any camera you might want to use. For instance, shooting S-Log3 on my little FX6 means middle grey should be at 41% IRE, while Arri's new Log C4 is best with middle grey at just 28%. Secondly, the IRE scale is not related to how we operate our cameras, or even how we perceive light levels. All of the controls on our cameras relate to stops. We all know that when you open the aperture by 1 stop, you double the amount of light hitting the sensor. And if you double the shutter speed, you halve the amount of light, which is like reducing it by 1 stop. Double the ISO, and you're raising the amplification of the sensor back up by 1 stop. And even if you think in decibels of gain like me, you'll know that plus or minus 6 dB is the same as plus or minus 1 stop of light. So whenever we operate our cameras, we think in stops. Even camera manufacturers rate their performance in stops of dynamic range. Did I mention how much I hate false colour? The main reason is because it isn't mapped to any camera, and every monitor manufacturer seems to do their own thing. There's no standardisation. Now, I know a lot of people like false colour, and if you're always using the same camera and monitor setup, you can probably make it work. I just don't see much advantage over zebras and a LUT. Plus it gives me a headache just looking at it. Although at first glance, EL Zone can look a bit like false colour, what EL Zone actually does is display our whole image in terms of stops. It also knows what flavour of log we're using, so correctly exposed 18% grey is always displayed on your screen as a grey colour, and that makes a lot of sense. All the stops above and below middle grey are then always displayed in the same range of colours, and all official versions of EL Zone display the same accurate colour scale in terms of stops. It's like having a spot meter giving you a reading for every visual element in your frame. And here's where it gets really useful. Let's go back in time and look at how I set up the shot you've been looking at so far. Now, I'm using the Monitor and Control app on my iPhone to control my FX6. Really good app, this. And I'm monitoring the picture using my Atomos Ninja 5 Plus, which has EL Zone built in now. All my settings are dialed in that I want to start with. Obviously, my lens is wide open at 1.8, which is where I wanted to start, and my ISO is the base ISO of 800 with S-Log3. Now, the Ninja knows that I'm shooting S-Log3 Cinegamma, so it knows where 18% grey should be, but I don't even need an 18% grey card, or in fact any card, to get this exposure right. So what I'll do is get the window behind me under control first using ND. And it's still too bright with a bit of ND. I can take that down. And I'm looking at the Ninja to get it into a level which is, it's not going to clip. What I don't want to do is go completely white on the EL zone. But that's working quite well as an acceptable exposure, just about, maybe a bit more ND. I can then bring up my key light so that I raise the level. Again, looking at EL zone, I want the bright side of the subject's face to be about a stop, maybe half a stop, anywhere between half a stop and 1.5 stops over middle grey. I also want the shaded side of the face to be about a half to 1 stop under middle grey. And that puts the skin tones of a fair-skinned person roughly in the right place for S-Log3. So I don't need a grayscale, I don't need any charts, I can just look at the EL zone and I can wind my light up or down until I get a yellow side of the face and the darker. See, that's too dark and that's verging on too bright. I can take it down until I get an exposure which I think looks good on EL zone. We've got yellow on one side and we've got the green, the darker green of the right levels of shadow. That's all I need. It's as quick as that. Now, the really useful thing about this, and the thing that makes it so fast, is that you can visualize every element in your frame in terms of stops, in terms of light level. So if you have something that is maybe 1 stop under and you want to lift it up by 1 stop and you don't have enough light, you know that you just need to get another identical light. So you've doubled it, you've doubled the amount of light, and you've gone up by 1 stop. That can be a background element, or if I want to bring this window down by 1 stop, I can just do it with ND and I know exactly where I am. I then have to raise my key light by 1 stop and balance it all out again. But this is all done without any grayscale, white bits of card, charts, nothing. You can visualize it really quickly and really easily. Most importantly, really accurately. There's sort of 2 halves to this video. You see, EL Zone has been out for a while now, and to be honest, I'm surprised that something this useful hasn't really taken off. It's available on newer small HD monitors and as an upgrade on some Atomos monitors. I think it's also included on a few of the Panasonic Varicams and even a Sigma FP camera, but that's about it. Why isn't it standard on every monitor and every camera that can possibly shoot log? So that's why I'm hoping this video might encourage you to give EL Zone a try. You never know, you might find it as useful as I do, and if lots of people demand it, more manufacturers might start including it as the new standard, which would make it even better. But there is a problem. Much as I admire all the work that Ed Lachman has done on this, I'm genuinely shocked that he's managed to obtain a patent for something which basically looks like a variation on false colour. True, it's based on stops rather than IRE, and that does make it more useful, but having a scale representing stops is nothing new. Ansel Adams, the wonderful landscape photographer, famously developed a zone system representing stops way back in the late 1930s. It was shades of grey, and he differentiated them with Roman numerals instead of coloured chips, but the principle, much the same. Now, obviously, I'm not a patent lawyer, but if anyone watching this is, and maybe passionate about photography, we might need your help. So I'll put a link to the patent in the description below. I've read it a few times, and it's still not clear to me why this patent was granted. It looks like it's only the colours used in EL Zone which make it unique. Either way, I suspect this patent, or possibly Ed's licensing fees, are the main reason EL Zone hasn't become mainstream. When I started this video, I made an ordinary 33-point cube LUT for S-Log3. You can load this onto any Sony camera or any monitor that accepts user LUTs. I've tested it on my FX6 and it works as it should, displaying accurate exposure in stops. This is very basic maths and surprisingly easy for anyone to make. It even works brilliantly on the M&C mobile app. I don't think my LUT breaks any patents. And I wanted to give it away so we could all have a go. But now I'm a little scared. Which is a shame, because using stops is always how photographers have measured exposure. Maybe Nikon, fresh from their recent red patent success, could help us all out. Thanks for watching.